You open your eyes and you're in the Middle Ages, where we are going to dive deep, and I mean really deep, into the brutal, completely unfiltered realities of medieval peasant life. We are stripping away all that shiny romance of knights and grand castles, and instead, we are stepping directly into the mud. You might really want to brace yourself for this one, because this survival guide, yeah, it's absolutely anything but a fairy tale.
And no, don't get excited. You are not a noble. Let's be honest for a second. Do you really think you'd be royalty if we magically teleported you back in time? Of course not. The harsh, statistical reality is that you, my friend, are a peasant. Okay, let's dive right into this, because we need to completely shatter that little illusion right off the bat. There are absolutely no silk sheets waiting for you here. There are no roaring hearths and giant stone castles, and there are definitely no grand feasts. There is literally only one thing on the agenda: survival.
Section 1. Waking up in dirt. Welcome to your medieval home. Let's step inside, shall we?
So, your house. It is literally just one single room. That is it. Just one. I want you to really try and imagine the agonizing claustrophobia of this setup. Think about the house or the apartment that you live in right now. Got it? Now I want you to mentally compress every single domestic purpose you can possibly imagine into one single enclosed, windowless feeling little box.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer madness of the situation. This one tiny room has to be your bedroom, your kitchen, your living room, and your storage space. But you know what the absolute most shocking part is? It serves as an emergency farm. Seriously, the animals sleep right inside with you to keep warm. You are sharing your cramped sleeping quarters with chickens, goats, and yeah, probably a pig. They are quite literally breathing down your neck while you try to get some sleep. And what are you and your lovely livestock standing on? Well, the floor is dirt. Just literally dirt. We're not talking about polished stone or even nicely smooth wooden planks here. Nope. Every single time anyone takes a step, a cloud of dust just floats right up into the air. When the goat shifts its weight, dust. When you turn over in your sleep, dust. You are forced to breathe in this kicked-up grime all day and all night long. The ground you walk on outside is the exact same ground you sleep on inside. Section 2, the freezing flea bed, your morning comfort. Or, well, lack thereof. Let's talk about the architecture of your house for a second. The windows in your home, they have absolutely no glass. None whatsoever. All you have are these uneven, drafty wooden shutters. If you kick them hard enough, they sort of close, but they are incredibly punishing. They let in the freezing cold air, they let in swarms of flies, and even worse, at night, those same gaps bleed out every single bit of precious heat you spent all day trying to trap. You are literally fighting a losing battle against the elements while you sleep. So what are you actually lying on while freezing to death? A nice, plush mattress? Absolutely not. You sleep on a rough cloth bag that's stuffed with straw. Really try to imagine the texture of that. Standing up every morning doesn't feel refreshing at all. It honestly feels like you fell asleep on a pile of gardening tools. Your back aches, your joints are incredibly stiff, and the material underneath you offers absolutely zero support. Now, you might be wondering, who exactly are you sharing this luxurious straw bag with? Well, you are far, far from alone. First off, you have your microscopic roommates. Lice and fleas live right there in that straw, and let's face it, you've pretty much just accepted them as rent-free tenants at this point. Then you've got your human roommates. Your entire extended family sleeps right beside you. Your parents, your siblings, your children, and yeah, even that one uncle who showed up 2 years ago and somehow just never left. Privacy, it's fundamentally non-existent. Section 3, choking on the smoke. Let's talk about the air you breathe. The very second you wake up, what do you hear? Coughing? People in this era cough way more than they breathe. And why is that? It's because most peasant houses had an open fire burning directly inside the very same room where everyone slept. And here's the real kicker, there was often no chimney. None. So that thick, inescapable smoke didn't just casually leave. It hung heavy in the air, day after day, year after year. You were forced to breathe in this thick smoke from childhood. And then, oh boy, then there is the smell. Everyone in that little unventilated room smells terrible. I want you to imagine taking the smell of a wet dog, mixing it tightly with sweaty armpits, pouring in some rotten milk, and then layering all of that under the heavy, choking scent of burned wood. Take a second to let that fully sink in. That overwhelming, stomach-churning stench is just the ambient aroma of your life. And remember, this is all before anyone has even started working for the day.
Section 4. A very old stew. It is time for breakfast. Let's move to the kitchen area and see how this builds.
So, your breakfast is waiting for you in a carved wooden bowl. It's a dish called pottage. And the reality of this meal is honestly wild. Pottage is a stew that has been continually boiling since your great-great-grandfather was alive. Just think about the multi-generational nature of that for a second. This is not a fresh pot of soup, not at all. This is a gray, boiling liquid that contains the distant culinary history of your entire ancestry. See, they don't make a new stew, ever. They simply add whatever falls into the pot. So today, that might be some grains, maybe some roots, whatever random vegetables they scrounged up out back. A bean if you're incredibly lucky. A pebble if you're not. Whatever fell in is what you eat. This means the boiling meal you are about to consume is quite literally older than most of the people sitting in the room with you right now. And to eat this ancient gray stew, you have a spoon. Well, it's a stick that someone carved with a knife. But we need to talk about that knife, because it is the exact same knife they used yesterday to castrate a goat. Let that sink in. They carved your everyday eating utensil with the goat castration knife. Hygiene as a concept essentially has not been invented yet. There is an absolute terrifying absence of sterilization in your world. Section 5. The danger of bread. It's basically a medieval weapon. So, you've got a side dish of bread to go with your pottage. But why is it rock hard? Well, it's because it's not made of pure flour. To stretch out the cheap flour, bakers would mix it with literal sawdust, tree bark, and powdered grass. Yeah, you heard me right. You are eating wood and grass disguised as a loaf of bread. It is so incredibly dense and unyielding that it absolutely must be desperately soaked in your ancient stew just so your teeth stand a fighting chance of not cracking right out of your skull when you finally bite down. But the sheer hardness of the bread isn't even the scariest part. So the crucial point here is that sometimes the rye flour itself was highly, highly dangerous. Medieval rye could easily be infected with a fungus called ergot. If you eat this infected bread, the escalation of symptoms is absolutely horrifying. Step 1, you experience terrifying, vivid hallucinations. Step 2, gangrene actually sets into your limbs. And step 3, in extreme cases, death. Your mundane morning slice of bread is literally a gamble with your own life. Section 6. Morning beer for survival. Let's look at the hydration stakes. To wash down that bark bread and your ancestral pottage, you obviously need a drink. Everyone in the family needs a drink, even the little kids. But why beer? Well, now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast. You see, drinking river water could kill you faster than a sword in battle. River water was full of deadly parasites, animal waste, and literally whatever the town upstream decided to dump into it. It was a complete biological hazard. Small beer, on the exact other hand, was life-saving. The chemistry of the brewing process involves boiling and fermentation, which effectively killed off most of those dangerous waterborne bacteria. But to be completely clear here, they weren't chugging heavy stouts and passing out by 9 a.m. Small beer was a very specific, very weak version of beer with an incredibly low alcohol content. It was consumed all day long as the primary, safe hydration method to simply survive the day, and it absolutely wouldn't get you drunk. It was essentially just purified water with a slight caloric bonus. Breakfast is done. Your stomach feels wrong. Very wrong. And what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about medieval medicine. Well, we're going on a deeply immersive, highly visceral, and honestly, completely terrifying journey back in time. We're diving headfirst into the incredibly gritty reality of medieval illness. So as we go through this, you're going to notice a very dark red and brown world. That's your visual cue for illness, for infection, and for the kind of omnipresent danger that literally lurked in every single shadow of a medieval town. We are going to explore a world where the science was, frankly, incredibly flawed, the streets were downright lethal, and your local doctor? Yeah, he was also the guy who cut your hair. So let's get right into it. I want to plunge you directly into the scene right now. Imagine you're walking down these narrow, crooked alleys. It's mid-morning, and a thick, heavy fog just hangs in the air. If you listen closely in your mind's ear, you can almost hear the constant, hollow sound of dripping water echoing off the stone. There's the murmuring and shouting of crowded throngs of people, and from somewhere deep in the shadows, the very distinct sound of distant retching.
It's in this exact environment that, about 20 minutes after breakfast, your stomach suddenly decides to stage a violent, twisting revolution. And we're not talking about a cute little tummy ache here. No, this is a deep, agonizing pain that hits you like a spear from the inside. You instantly realize that something in that questionable meat stew you just ate was definitively not meant for human consumption. And just like that, you need to go. Right now.
Okay, let's dive into this massive problem. You need to go, but there is absolutely no plumbing. There's no bathroom, and there certainly isn't a toilet as we know it. You have two terrifyingly limited options here. Option 1, you stay indoors, you squat over a wooden bucket, and you just kind of hope nobody is watching. But, spoiler alert for the Middle Ages, everyone is watching. It's a one-room house, and it's the exact same bucket every single member of your family uses. Heck, if you keep livestock indoors to stay warm, the family goat has probably used it once or twice. Option 2, you take matters outdoors and dump the whole shebang straight onto the public street. Of course, the horrific reality here is that every single other person in your town has chosen that exact same option. So if you step outside, the air hits you like a physical wall. It's heavy, it's thick with moisture, and it smells like a horrifying cross between a stagnant swamp and, well, death itself. I want you to picture this next part playing out like a dramatic, slow-motion animation in your head. People literally open their second-story windows, hoist their family buckets over the ledge, and just pour their waste straight down into the street below. Now, if they were feeling exceptionally polite, they might shout "Gardez-vous," which is actually a French warning to watch out for the water right before letting gravity do its work. Except, let's be entirely clear here. What was falling from the sky in slow motion was absolutely not water. And that brilliantly illustrates the horrific consequence of this daily routine. What is flowing through the center of these cobblestone streets isn't a stream. No, it is a brown, bubbling river of literally everything a human body can produce. But it doesn't stop there. It mixes with animal dung, rotting food scraps, dead rats, and when it rains, the water just churns it all together into this thick, toxic sludge. When it rains heavily, this sludge actually floods directly into homes, soaking right into the floorboards. When the summer heat hits, it literally steams in the sun, creating this inescapable miasma that chokes the entire neighborhood. And you know what the most terrifying part is? Children are playing right next to it. Stray dogs are eating out of it. And it all flows downhill, slowly and steadily, directly into the town's main river, which just so happens to be the exact same river the entire population draws their drinking water from.
And that brings us to the inevitable, invisible killers. This completely unfiltered, massively contaminated water supply turned medieval cities into absolute death traps. You had constant, rampant outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Dysentery and typhoid, they weren't rare tragedies, they were just a typical Tuesday. People were sick so constantly and with such regularity that they honestly thought feeling terrible was just the normal human condition. Actually, historians and archaeologists looking at medieval remains estimate that in these crowded towns, the average person hosted intestinal parasites their entire life. Let that sink in for a second. You just had worms your whole life and you never even knew it wasn't supposed to be that way?
The sheer scale of the devastation here is really hard to wrap our modern minds around. We are talking tens of millions of people. This entire system of dumping waste into the streets, having it flow into the drinking water, and then consuming it all over again, it was a brutally efficient, perfectly closed-loop, disease-spreading machine. It wiped out tens of millions of people across Europe, completely indiscriminately, cutting down the young, the old, the rich, and the poor alike.
And here is the incredible, deeply ironic tragedy of this whole era. It would take another 500 years, 500 years, for anyone in the medical or scientific community to finally look at the bubbling river of sludge, look at the drinking water, and actually make the connection. Half a millennium of massive, catastrophic loss of life before humanity realized that, hey, maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't drink where we dump our buckets.
Section 2. The doctor will see you now, sort of.
So let's go back to our narrative. After your heroic, agonizing trip to the bucket, your stomach still hurts. The pain isn't stopping. It's growling, it's burning, and it is getting worse by the minute. Naturally, in a blind panic, you decide it's time to visit your local doctor. Except, in a darkly comedic twist of medieval fate, there are no doctors. Well, not for you anyway. The highly educated, quote-unquote, real doctors who actually study at universities, yeah, they only work for kings, queens, and high-working bishops. So who does the average peasant go to when their insides are staging a revolt?
you're left with the terrifying village alternative, the Barber-Surgeon. Imagine walking into his shop. The room is lit only by flickering candlelight, casting these really long, unsettling shadows across the walls. As you look closer, you see his crude, genuinely terrifying tools laid out on a wooden bench. This guy is the ultimate village multitasker. He cuts your hair, he sharpens your kitchen knives, he yanks out your rotting teeth, he drains your blood when you're sick, and perhaps most disturbing of all, he probably brews his own beer in the exact same wooden bucket he uses to catch limbs during amputations. Now, what's really fascinating here is the complete and total absence of what we would call basic sanitation. You are about to be treated by a bare-handed surgeon who has very likely just finished gutting a pig or slicing off a gangrenous toe. Did soap exist in the Middle Ages? Yes, technically it did. But it was incredibly expensive, it was made from animal fats and ashes, and it was largely considered a luxury item. Hand washing in a medical setting wasn't a daily practice. It was saved for special occasions, which for the village barber surgeon meant absolutely never.
To understand what happens next, welcome to our little failed science explainer. The absolute pinnacle of medieval medical theory was the four humors. They genuinely, truly believed that your entire body and health were controlled by four magical fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. It's a beautifully simple, ironically cheerful, and entirely wrong scientific theory. The logic was foolproof in their minds. If you were perfectly healthy, your fluids were perfectly balanced. If you were sick, well, it simply meant one of these magical juices was overflowing and you were chemically unbalanced. So, you walk into the dimly lit shop, clutching your stomach in absolute agony. But here is the most terrifying part of this whole ordeal. Before you can even open your mouth to explain your symptoms, or mention the bad stew, or even describe the twisting pain, the surgeon already knows exactly what's wrong with you. His confidence is unwavering, absolute, and horribly, horribly misplaced. Your diagnosis: unbalanced humors. Obviously, you have too much blood. And the scientifically backed cure for this: they are going to open you up and drain you like a rain barrel. Now, if this were a movie, this is exactly where the dramatic, sweeping orchestral swells would kick in. The tension is incredibly high. The surgeon grabs a soiled rag, ties it tightly around your upper arm as a makeshift tourniquet, and reaches for a rusted metal blade that looks suspiciously like a dull butter knife. Without hesitation, he slices open a vein in your arm to let the quote-unquote bad blood out into a bowl. Keep in mind, you came into this shop severely dehydrated from your stomach illness. Now you're leaving with half your total blood volume drained into a bowl, and you face a highly probable 50% chance of just immediately passing out face first. And where are you passing out? Right into that steaming, toxic, rat-infested river of sludge we talked about earlier, lying completely helpless in the filthy medieval mud. Oh, but wait, there's a secondary diagnostic tool our multitasking surgeon might employ. He might ask you to provide a urine sample in a glass flask. Now, in the modern world, we look at urine under microscopes to find bacteria or test for chemical markers, right? But medieval scientific testing consisted of holding a flask up to the candlelight, staring intently at the color, swirling it around, and taking a deep, hearty sniff. Yep, he makes a wild, completely unscientific guess based entirely on the aroma. So, shocker, the bloodletting didn't work. I know, right? The dark comedy of this medical nightmare just keeps escalating. Imagine the dramatic music swelling again as the surgeon reaches for his trusty backup plan, the leech jar. He keeps a glass jar full of squirming, writhing, infinitely hungry bloodsuckers just sitting on a dusty shelf. And where do they live? Often in what used to be someone's old, murky, stagnant bathwater. He reaches in with his bare, unwashed hands, fishes out a handful of these slimy, muscular worms, and just slaps them right onto your pale, sweating skin. You can literally feel them latch on. And the treatment plan? You just sit there in the dim light and wait for them to literally suck your blood until they get so monstrously fat and engorged that they naturally pop off and plummet onto the wooden floorboards. Let's summarize the escalating desperation of medieval treatments here, because it brilliantly illustrates the mindset of the time. Step 1, physical cutting and draining of your blood. Step 2, applying swamp parasites to suck out even more blood. If neither of those physical tortures cures your stomach bug, which of course they won't because you have dysentery from drinking contaminated water, the surgeon moves to step 3. And this is where the tone shifts from frantic medical torture to something much, much darker. Step 3 is prayer. In their deeply religious, highly superstitious worldview, if the physical humors weren't the problem, there was only one logical, deeply defeated conclusion left. The burden of illness falls entirely on you. You haven't just eaten bad stew, you have fundamentally angered God. The surgery failed.
The Leeches failed, and now the village has started to whisper one word, a word that in the Middle Ages meant only one thing: your life is over.
Okay, let's dive into Chapter 3, Surviving the Medieval Witch Hunt. It's an incredibly dark, totally immersive look at medieval survival. If you've been following along with our journey, you already know that everyday life back then was just a non-stop, grueling battle against the elements, rampant disease, and starvation. But today, the most immediate danger isn't a plague-carrying rat. It's not a devastatingly harsh winter. It's actually coming from your own neighbors. I want you to just picture the village around you right now as the sun sets. The vibrant colors of the day totally drain away into these cold grays and harsh, elongated shadows. The only light comes from the crackle of distant torchlight, and carried on the freezing wind is the restless, anxious murmur of a crowd. This threat is so utterly terrifying and so deeply rooted in the psychology of the era that it could literally erase your entire existence overnight. Did someone just say, witch? You know, in our modern world, we tend to associate that specific word with harmless Halloween costumes, right? Or fantasy movies and pop culture. But if you are standing knee-deep in the mud of an isolated medieval village, completely surrounded by deeply paranoid people gripping pitchforks and blazing torches, that single, solitary word is the absolute last thing you ever want to hear whispered in your direction. It fundamentally shifts the reality around you. It completely strips away your humanity in the eyes of everyone you've ever known, and suddenly you're a monster that has to be destroyed for the safety of the community. That's not a joke. That's a death sentence. You really need to deeply understand how absolute this reality was during the height of these panics. You might sit there today and think, well, I just lay low. I'd keep my head down, mind my own business, not do anything suspicious. But navigating this era? Yeah, it simply wasn't that straightforward. While it's historically accurate that the vast majority of the accused were women, especially those who lived on the fringes of society without male protection, men were absolutely not safe from this phenomenon either. This was an inescapable trap of mass hysteria. It could snap shut on anyone, completely regardless of gender or age or your social standing. It was a societal contagion, and it was entirely fueled by fear.
The mundane triggers. Knowing too much about herbs. Looking too confident boiling soup. One bad harvest. A dead cow. A hateful neighbor. The true absurd horror of this era really sinks in when you look at these incredibly mundane things that could set the nightmare into motion. Let's break them down. Knowing too much about herbs, if you had generations of passed down wisdom about which leaf cured a fever, you weren't a healer, suddenly you were wielding dark magic. Boiling soup? Simply making a stew with a bit too much focus, maybe absent-mindedly muttering to yourself. That draws superstitious eyes. A bad harvest? Look, medieval agriculture was precarious. When frost ruined the crops, society demanded a tangible villain, not just bad weather. A dead cow. That was a massive financial investment. If it drops dead, that's economic ruin, and they desperately need a scapegoat. Or, honestly, just a hateful neighbor with a petty grudge over a land boundary. Just one of these totally normal occurrences could transform you into the village witch.
Because here is the terrifying truth. They aren't looking for evidence. They are looking for someone to blame. To really grasp this, you have to completely strip away your modern understanding of the legal system. The concept of innocent until proven guilty doesn't exist here. There are no careful forensic investigations, no objective judges, and definitely no impartial juries. Once the rumor starts, once that hateful neighbor points a trembling finger in the town square, the shouting villagers and the accusatory faces illuminated by the firelight have already sealed your fate. Mob mentality takes complete control, and rational logic is thrown entirely out the window. They're terrified, they're starving, they're angry, and they need a target to burn away those fears. And unfortunately, today, that target is you.
The impossible interrogation, the town square trap. Imagine the sheer physical ordeal of this moment. You are violently dragged from the perceived safety of your own home, pulled relentlessly through the dirt and the muck of the village streets by people you've literally known since you were a child. You're shoved into the absolute center of the town square. Normally, this is the focal point of community trade, right? But now it's been transformed into this terrifying stage for your destruction. And the interrogation you're about to face, it isn't designed to uncover the nuanced truth. It is a carefully constructed psychological trap designed to secure a confession at all costs.
Saying no means that's exactly what a witch would say. Saying yes means you schedule your execution. This brilliantly illustrates the terrifying catch-22 of medieval justice.
They stand you up in the square, completely surrounded by hostility, and ask the ultimate loaded question, are you a witch? If you say no, if you vehemently deny it and tell the honest truth, the mob doesn't believe you. They just yell, that's exactly what a witch would say. Only a liar in league with darkness would deny it. But let's say the psychological pressure is just too much. Let's say you break, or you mistakenly think a false confession will grant you mercy, and you say yes. Well, you've just scheduled your own execution. There is no clever way out of this dialogue tree. Every single answer you can possibly give leads to a horrific, inescapable end.
Trial by ordeal. The river awaits. Since your words entirely failed to satisfy them, the mob decides to let a higher power sort out the truth. I want you to feel the temperature drop even further right now. Hear the sound of rushing, dark water in your mind, cutting through the silence of the night. The crowd marches you away from the town square, pushing you down a steep, muddy embankment straight toward the cold, unforgiving edge of the local river. The overwhelming dread is mounting with every single footstep you take toward that shoreline.
Trial by ordeal is a medieval practice where it was genuinely believed God would decide your fate through a deadly physical test. And look, they aren't just going to ask you to swim. They are going to forcefully tie you up. They'll bind your hands and your feet together with rough, heavy rope so you have absolutely no physical way to maneuver or defend yourself. Then they hurl your bound body into those dark, freezing, treacherous waters. The underlying belief here was that by putting you in an inherently fatal, impossible situation, a divine entity would actively step in to provide the final, indisputable verdict. So sink equals innocent, but you drown. Float equals guilty, so you are executed. Just marvel at the staggering brilliance of this medieval logic for a second. Water was viewed as a pure, holy element, deeply associated with the sacrament of baptism. So if you sink to the rocky bottom of the freezing river, hey, great news, you are innocent. The pure water has accepted your pure soul. But of course, your hands and feet are tightly bound by heavy rope, so you drown at the bottom of the riverbed. You are very much dead. But hey, at least your eternal reputation remains perfectly intact, right? Now, let's say you manage to float. Maybe your heavy woolen clothing traps an air pocket. If you float, the pure water has physically rejected your deeply impure, corrupted soul. That means you're guilty. And because you are a guilty witch, they will actively fish you out of the water, dry you off, and promptly execute you anyway. Sink and die, or float and die. What a truly flawless, airtight judicial system.
Logic wasn't really humanity's strong point back then. Just let that sink in for a moment. Let the sheer irony and the overwhelming bleakness of that historical reality linger in the silence. Picture the flickering orange firelight from dozens of torches reflecting off the black, freezing, turbulent water of the river. The entire village stands on the muddy banks, watching you splash, gasp, and violently struggle against the ropes, completely convinced in their hearts that they are carrying out a righteous and divine justice. It's a waking nightmare that you simply cannot escape from.
Surviving the Middle Ages, the 24-hour gauntlet. Let's take a collective step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture of this historical journey we're on. It is so incredibly easy to forget, amidst all the intense horror and panic of the witch trial, that you have technically been awake in this nightmare era for less than a single calendar day. You've barely had time to blink. And yet, you must consider the sheer mind-numbing exhaustion of simply trying to exist in this brutal timeline.
You've survived the smoke-filled air. Think about what your body has already physically endured, just since the sun came up today. From the absolute moment you woke up, your lungs have been quietly burning. From the total lack of ventilation, the constant smoldering indoor wood fires required for warmth, and the heavy, suffocating, soot-filled atmosphere of a standard medieval dwelling. You've survived stew older than your grandparents, a horrifying, constantly bubbling iron pot of perpetual broth that's probably been continuously cooking over the hearth since the last century. It's filled with stale crusts of hard bread, unidentifiable bits of gristle, and ancient strains of bacteria that modern science probably doesn't even have names for anymore. You've survived literal rivers of human waste. You physically walked through the revolting, unpaved, deeply rutted streets of the settlement, actively sidestepping the actual, raw contents of wooden chamber pots that were casually tossed out of second-story windows, splashing right into the muddy thoroughfare where you stand. And somehow, you've survived having your vital blood drained by a local barber-surgeon. The exact same untrained man who aggressively cuts hair and pulls rotted teeth decided the absolute best way to cure your mild afternoon headache was to slice open a vein in your arm and let you casually bleed into a rusted bowl. You have survived an unbelievable gauntlet of physical, environmental, and medical torture in just a few short hours. This wasn't rare. This was normal.
This was Tuesday. I want you to really deeply absorb what that means. The witch trials, the smoke, the disease, the brutal lack of basic logic. This wasn't some dark, terrifying horror movie that they got to turn off at the end of the night. This was simply their daily life. It was their morning, their noon, and their night. Year after grueling year.
The foundation of modern comforts. Every clean glass of water, every antibiotic, every mattress, every private bathroom. Just think about every single clean, completely clear glass of filtered water you drink without the lingering fear of contracting a deadly disease. Every standard antibiotic pill that casually cures a minor bacterial infection that used to be an agonizing death sentence. Every soft, supportive mattress you comfortably sleep on. Every private, hygienic indoor bathroom you use on a daily basis. Your ancestors lived in that horrific, paranoid, dirt-filled, perilous world for decades upon decades. They somehow endured the paranoia of the witch trials, the devastating waves of plagues, the brutal winters of starvation, and the maddening lack of scientific logic. The entirety of our brilliant, glowing, comfortable modern world is built directly on top of the suffering, the sacrifices, and the unbreakable, stubborn endurance of people who started with absolutely nothing.
Say thank you, medieval grandpa. You absolutely earned it. We owe an incredibly profound debt of gratitude to the harsh human experience of the past. It took an unimaginable amount of physical suffering, psychological resilience, and sheer, undeniable human grit to slowly drag humanity out of the Dark Ages and meticulously build the comfortable, logical, secure modern era we are so incredibly lucky to enjoy today. It's a deeply humbling realization, and it is something we should never, ever take for granted.